Now I'm excited to welcome back to our show, Mr. Kelley Ford from the Lines.com podcast and the We Hate Your Team podcast. You can follow Kelley on Twitter at KFordRatings. Kelley, as Hank Williams Jr. says, are you ready for some football?
Oh my gosh, you're getting me all excited, Kev. Yes, I am very ready for some football. We were talking just before we came on here about how, the summer brings with it the storylines, the off the field stuff. It's all very important. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff here today too, but there is nothing like it for me than when we get into the season and we start seeing how the power ratings and the resume rankings are changing week over week. And we have actual, real, live college football on Saturdays to digest and talk about. There's no time of year like it. I'm very excited, and I appreciate you having me on. It's always a good time.
Oh, yes. And, man, it's so funny. I think it was January, maybe like a week after the championship game. I see you counting down to the next full college football season. I'm like, geez, I'm just trying to get into basketball right now. My man is committed, is what I was feeling.
We've had the countdown going every day since then. There's actually, Kev, I've done a better job about making the website, k4ratings.com, more useful. I put a lot more things on there now. Right on the homepage, I got the big logo, K4 Ratings, which, by the way, my wife says I need to change, and that's a whole other thing. But anyway, it's there. FBS, college football returns in, ... There's a countdown going down to the second. We are currently at 9 days, 23 hours, 26 minutes, and 1 second until we get Notre Dame Navy kicking off. There you go, right on the homepage. Boom. That's what we're looking at there. So I can't wait. It's fun. It's exciting. It's been cool to count down.
Yeah, awesome. I noticed the ticker. I do check you for every once in a while. I love it. I think you do a fantastic job at Kelley Ford Ratings. You're growing in popularity. You've got a lot of fun stuff going on here. I have a few questions for you, and I think we can just kind of start off here a little bit more in general. And I might have covered this last year, but for any new the listeners out there, how did you get started with K Ford Ratings? And is this an efficiency rating or kind of both devolved from power ratings?
Yeah, for sure. So with the K Ford Ratings, I have always had a love for college football. I mean, it goes back to before I can remember. My earliest memories, I'm sitting there watching college football games and loving every second of it. So always loved this sport. I really don't even know why. The 2007 season, for all of its craziness, was the one that really cemented it as my favorite sport of all time. But the power ratings really were born out of, I have the love for college football and a knack for numbers too. Always have been fascinated with them. Bill Connolly with his SP Plus, or at the time S&P Plus, and Brian Fremeau, FEI. Those were the two guys. They started putting out their numbers, their power ratings around that 2007 season, if I'm not mistaken. I've been following them from the very beginning, just taking in all the information they had to put out there. That's how I started to kind of view college football teams and games, was through the lens of their numbers. And after enough years of doing that, I got a little older and said, you know what? I'm going to try to do this. Let me see what I can do and kind of put my own spin on a power rating and try to get into this space too. So that's how the K Ford ratings were born. My approach is very similar to Bill and Brian's. I mean, the engine of the K Ford ratings, I imagine, is very, very similar to the engine of SP Plus or of FEI. Of course, as I've gotten going and kind of found my own way, I've added little things here and there and have my own secret sauces that go into it and all that. But at the end of the day, it's very similar to what they're doing with a power rating. What we're doing, Kev, is we're trying to project forward. We're trying to see which teams would be favored tomorrow on a neutral field against which other teams. And so that's how the ultimate goal of what I'm trying to do with the power ratings. From those power ratings, I'm able to generate what I actually find to be more interesting to me personally, resume rankings. So the power ratings serve as the engine for my resume ranking formula or model, if you will. And what I'm doing with that is viewing every single FBS team, all 133, viewing their schedule through a common lens, through the lens of the average top 25 team. And you're showing the schedule difficulty there on the screen. What I'm doing when I'm looking through that is we're saying, what would the average top 25 team be expected to achieve against this team's schedule? So as we're looking at Florida right there, number one, most difficult schedule in the entire country, the average top 25 team would be expected to win about 7.7 games against Florida's schedule, compared to, if you go down LSU's number 10, 8.33 games against LSU's schedule. So to me, that's what I get the most excitement out of, actually, is not the power ratings, but the resume rankings. Of course, all of that comes into focus later in the year and becomes more informative. But that's how I got started. I love college football. I really like numbers. Bill and Brian were doing great work, and I wanted to get into the space too. So that's kind of what the K Ford ratings are all about.
Matt, without getting too nerdy, it's cool because this changes every week, right? In every single game, doesn't the strength of schedule slightly change because it all just kind of recalculates as things go through?
Yeah, without a doubt. So what we're looking at on the screen right now, these are preseason projections. But once the games start getting played and I phase out the preseason data slowly week after week as the season goes on, that's replaced with in-season data, which of course is much more informative and much more valuable. We only get 12 data points in a regular season for most teams. Every single game matters a ton in college football. That's one of the reasons why I love it so much. So yes, while right now Florida's schedule is projecting as the most difficult, it's possible that as we're going throughout the year, Florida's schedule actually becomes not the most difficult. It's still going to be up there. You're not going to drop all the way down to outside the top 30 or anything, but they might not be the number one schedule difficulty, if you will, by the end of the year. So yes, it's all changing. Resumes change every single week. After week one, Kib, I mean, you have some teams that play in week 0, so they might have 2 games at that point, but the vast majority of teams, they got 1 game on their resume after week 1. That means that week 1 game, that's 100% of the resume. It makes sense, right? But in week 2, you've added another game. Now your week 1 game is 50% and your week 2 game is 50%. Week 3, now every game's worth 33%. So as we go, teams are building on their resume week after week. And that's why my most deserving rankings, it's not like an AP poll where, you know what, hey, you were number 1 and you won last week, you're going to stay there. No, if you were number 1 last week and you played an FCS team this week, you didn't add much to your resume. Maybe the number 2 team played the power rated number 1 team and they beat them. They're going to jump you because they've added so much more to their resume this week. It's not a static, hey, win and you stay here like some polls are. It's very much a dynamic flow every single week. What are we adding to the resume? How bad is a loss? How good are the wins? Because some losses may not hurt you that much. If you're sitting there as a power rated number 10 team in the country and you lose to the power rated number 1 team in a very statistically even game, or maybe you were even better from a statistics standpoint, but you lost on a last second field goal, your power rating is likely going to go up. Your resume ranking probably won't go up since you've lost the game, but it probably won't fall very far, if at all, depending on the timing of this game. If it's late in the year, especially as it's becoming less and less informative each game, or weighted less and less each game individually, it won't fall that much because you were expected to lose. The average top 25 team was expected to lose that game, and you've outperformed probably the expectation in terms of the margin of victory, which I also incorporate as well. So yeah, I don't need to get too much into the numbers. I've already kind of gone down that road. I get very into it. It's very exciting. There's so much to digest. And every single week, we're adding pieces to the puzzle. And it all comes into focus come the end of December there.
Man, I tell you, did you come up with all these functions yourself? Are you like a stats major?
So I'm not a stats major. My undergrad degree is in mechanical engineering. So very math and science.
Close enough.
Yeah, so it's there. My mom is a high school math teacher. I've always been very into the math. The numbers do come relatively easy to me. But like I do have some original thoughts and implementations in there. But like I said, the base model of the K Ford ratings, the engine of K Ford ratings, is very similar to what Bill Connolly's doing at SP Plus, very similar to Brian Fremeau with FEI. My most deserving rankings, I won't lie, I've talked about this before. I got that concept, that idea from ESPN Strength of Record. Now, what I think makes my most deserving rankings just a little bit different, or candidly a little bit better than Strength of Record, and that's not to diminish Strength of Record, I think it's great, is I'm also incorporating an expected margin of victory or margin of defeat. Like I talked about a little bit earlier, Strength of Record is just what's your record and basically how is it compared to what would be expected of the average top 25 team through the lens of FPI. Mine just through the lens of the K Ford ratings. But it's not just what's your record relative to expected. I'm also incorporating that. How did you do in non-garbage time, points for and points against relative to expected, to get that margin of victory or margin of defeat? Because Kiev, if you're Wisconsin, as you have them there in the background, if you're Wisconsin and you lost at home to Ohio State by 3 points, and I am, let me see who else is on Ohio State's, or who else has to go to Wisconsin this year, as I'm looking it up quickly. So Ohio State's going to Wisconsin.
Nebraska, there
you go. So if you are Wisconsin and I'm Ohio State and I've gone to Wisconsin and I've lost to you or won by 3 points, and then Nebraska comes in there and Nebraska wins by 50 points, Nebraska should get more credit for playing Wisconsin because they performed better against the same opponent at the same location than Ohio State did. FPI is not, Strength of Records not looking at that for ESPN. K Ford most deserving rankings do incorporate that. It's not weighted as heavily, but it's in there because I think it's important, and I think it helps tell the story of these teams. It's not just the win-loss. It's how good and how bad were you in those wins and losses, and how dominant were you in those games.
So you said garbage time. Do you factor out garbage time?
I do filter out garbage time for 100% from the predictive ratings. Once we've reached garbage time and that threshold changes depending on what time of the game we're in, the predictive nature of the data that we're collecting at that point it is very much diminished and almost to the point of negligible at a certain point, at the point we call garbage time. For the most deserving rankings, there is it's garbage time kind of weighted down a little bit. It takes longer to get there for that point, because if teams are going to run it up, they're going to run it up, and that just proves their dominance. But at a certain point, beating Wisconsin by 50 and beating Wisconsin by 35, that 15-point difference is not quite as much as beating Wisconsin by 1 or beating Wisconsin by 16, right? And so there's a difference in terms, it's not just the absolute value of your margin of victory or defeat. Where are you on the scale? And also, there's a huge difference. I lost to Wisconsin by 7 versus I beat them by 8. That's still a 15-point gap, but now you've switched over 0, which makes it even more important. So yes, garbage time to a lesser extent is included in the most deserving ranking calculation, not nearly to the level that it is from the power rating standpoint.
Interesting. So, and that makes sense, because I don't want the true Alabama strength was always underrated because they would quit by the fourth quarter. And when they played a good team, they would end up covering that spread because, they looked at it as a whole rather than just 3 quarters, for example. And I think that's very important that you do that. And another thing you do is, let's say I beat some teams early and we thought they were good, and all of a sudden they lose a bunch of games later. That affects your power rating in the efficiency metrics, right?
100%. Yeah, no, a team is not the team you play in week 1 is likely that team, as they progress through their season, just like as you progress through your season, you're likely not going to be that same team in week 9 or week 12. Teams change and different events happen throughout the course of the year, whether it's on field, off field, heartbreaking loss, a last second field goal win that propels you. Things happen throughout the year that changes the trajectory of a team and its season. I've struggled with how to best account for that. Basically, what I've done is, for the most deserving rankings, for better or worse, and I've done a lot of back testing on this, and this is what I think is best for now, at least, until I get more data and change my mind again. Every team basically gets 2 chances here, 2 bites at the apple when it comes to awarding credit or fault for losses on the schedule. So if I'm looking, let's go back to Wisconsin again. Wisconsin here in week 1, they get Buffalo at home. Buffalo is currently power rated number 102. So at the time of this game, I'll finalize my ratings next week, and Buffalo is going to be around 102. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they end up being 102 coming into week 1. Buffalo's 102. Wisconsin wins that game. My line's 24.5 points. They win it by 24 points. Okay, great. They're getting credit in the most deserving rankings for beating the number 102 power rated team at home by 24 points. Let's say Buffalo goes on to have a tremendous year, way better than anybody expects. Their power rating rises. They end up winning the MAC, and they're winning all these games, and they're blowing teams out. Buffalo at the end of the year is power rated number 50 in my numbers. Wisconsin is now actually at that point going to get credit for beating the power rated number 50 team by 24 points. So in my model, in my most deserving rankings, you want the teams that you're playing on your schedule to outperform their projections from the beginning of the year or from the time that you played them. Wisconsin gets Minnesota in the final week. Minnesota's power rating going into week 13 is likely not going to be very much different from their power rating going into Selection Sunday just a week or 2 later. So the difference in terms of what Wisconsin can get from credit from Minnesota is not that great. But when you're playing teams early on, those teams can change for the better or worse. I've talked about what happens if Buffalo improves. Wisconsin can get more credit. If Buffalo's season tanks and they end up, finishing the year power rated number 130, Wisconsin's not going to get punished. They're still going to get credit for playing them when they were 102. So it's basically you get 2 checkpoints: the time you played them, or currently, which by the end of the year for everyone is the end of the year, which one were they better? The time you played them or the end of the year, you're going to get the maximum credit. You're not going to get punished. It's not perfect. I know that. Again, the relative margin of victory is a smaller piece here, so it matters even less. But it's the best way I've tried to account for. Teams change throughout the year, and you should get credit if a team has gotten better and you beat them and that's on your resume. But you shouldn't necessarily be punished if a team has gotten worse, because in some cases it could be they got worse because you beat them and it put them into a tailspin of their season. So why would we punish you? Because on that day, in that moment, they were the team that you played. So it's not a science, it's an art, but I try to bring as much objectivity into it as possible.
I can get way in the weeds with you, and I need to stop. I mean, I could talk about diminishing returns with this. I could talk about, I love how you do two things, but if you look at the past history of it, maybe you could fade away. The past games start diminishing a little bit as you're getting farther. There's so many different ways to look at it, but at least you do this because I think that's really important. You go farther than the FPIs and farther than a lot of people. And man, I would just love to see your equation someday and just see how much that you literally put into this. I'd probably learn something, but I'm sure there's just so much into it and so many hours that you put. It's just absolutely fantastic what you do. And it's great to the sports better. And that's what this show is all about. But before we get into the Sun Belt here, I got to ask you a few things. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but what do you feel about the college football realignments coming on? I know most people aren't loving it. Do you have any opinion on the way it's going and what could be changed?
I definitely have opinions on it. I try really hard not to be like a wet blanket on Twitter or too much of a Debbie Downer or whatever phrase you want to use. To be candid, it makes me sad. Like some of these changes make me sad. I've accepted them. We're moving forward. This is life. You get dealt hands, you deal with it, you move on. I'm still going to love college football. I'm still going to watch the 12-team CFP, on and on and on. But it makes me sad because I am nostalgic for the times that we had previously, the times when I was growing up learning college football. Listen, kids that are 5, 10 years old right now, they're not going to know anything different from Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC. USC and UCLA are in the Pac-12. So it's their reality. And as folks of my age get older, it gets phased out and we forget. Time moves on. It makes me sad. There are ones that I like. Colorado back to the Big 12. I like that because to me, I kind of froze the conferences in about 2007 anyway, and that's where Colorado was. So things like that make me happy. The biggest thing about it for me is I don't like that we're getting away from geographical regionality with conferences. So Texas, Oklahoma hurts me to the SEC, but I can deal with it because at least we're not getting too far out of that SEC footprint. USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington going to the Big Ten. I work in college athletics. I understand why those things are happening. It's all driven by the money and the revenue that can be generated. I'm not questioning why it's happening, but just because we can do things, does that mean we should? I think that's the philosophical question these athletic directors and administrators, presidents need to ask themselves. Hey, it's water under the bridge. It's done. It kills me to see that, though, because now the Big Ten, the footprint of the Big Ten, which I think should be a Midwestern league. Again, I'm from Indianapolis, live in Indy. I'm Midwest, Big Ten through and through. We now stretch from New Jersey to Washington and Southern California. It's the entire country. To me, that's not a conference. That's the NCAA. So, again, I don't want to get too Debbie Downer. I think it does create some exciting potentials and possibilities. And I like that some rivalries are being either restored or maintained through all of these realignments. But to me, I would love to see conferences be a geographical, and we're getting farther and farther away from that with every move that happens. So I maintain that we can have faith in the future and hope that we can get back to some sense of regional common sense in the future. But right now, that's where I am with realignment. I'm just really excited the games are going to get here so that the focus shifts to that instead of wondering who's going where and what's happening with now Florida State and the ACC. I know we're a day past their deadline. So anyway, there's a lot happening.
Here's the big thing. Here's the big problem, and you can kind of see this. And I feel like this is more of a setup. You see the two conferences getting bigger together. I almost feel like the smaller schools are now a farm system for the Big Ten and the SEC. The transfer portal and the NIL money is absolutely out of hand. How can you pay a kid money and have him leave the very next year? It absolutely makes no sense. It's haphazard. There's all kinds of issues with it, and there's kids that are going to be breaching that contract, and there's going to be athletic situations that might breach that contract as well, where they don't play the kid where he wants to get played. Now he wants to play more because he's getting paid, even though he's a future prospect. There's all kinds of problems, but the biggest problem is now you see the schools that we used to like to watch on MACtion and Tuesday night football, Friday night football, they're just getting picked off, by if they find one kid has a great year and they find out this 2-star guy should have been a 4-star guy, he leaves, he goes to Alabama, he goes to Oklahoma, he goes to the bigger schools, Penn State's, right? And that just takes away from them. And then the school's sitting here like, what the heck, man? I can't even get a step forward in this situation. If you're going to combine, if this is at all about education, and at all about the integrity of going to college and bettering yourself, this absolutely is the main thing that has to get fixed, in my opinion, Kelley.
there's a lot there to unpack. I don't disagree with a lot of it. Listen, being a college athletics administrator, I certainly have opinions on it, have to be careful about what I share, how I share, and all that stuff. But hey, I get it. I get the frustration. You're not alone in those things. I think there's a general sentiment about a lot of what you just said. And we've got a lot happening in college athletics, and college football is a primary driver of some of these changes. So yeah, man, there's a lot that we're trying to deal with and work through, and many challenges ahead for those of us in the college athletics administration, and we need to rise to the occasion. That's for sure.
Oh, for sure. Well, let's get into some fun stuff. Now that we just depressed everybody, let's get into some excitement and some forecasts going on. And before we get into the Sun Belt, I got to ask you a couple things. Let's start with just the CFB playoffs. Are you just going to go 1 through 4 on your ratings? Who do you have in the playoffs there, Kelley?
Yeah, so to me, I've got on my website, I've got the college football playoff contenders listed out by percent chance to make it based on my current numbers. I've got Georgia at a 70% chance to make the playoff, Ohio State at 53. Those are the only 2 teams in the country that have better than 50-50 chances by my numbers to make the CFP, more likely than not to make it this year. Alabama sitting there at a 41% chance to make it, Michigan at a 34% chance. So the 4 most likely are Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan. I would be shocked if that was the actual Final 4 at the end of the year, because that means we have 2 from the SEC, 2 from the Big Ten, and no other conference is represented. I just don't think that's going to happen. So which teams are there kind of next in line if things break their way, or if they're able to win their games this year? I've got Clemson and USC both at a 25% chance to make the CFP. And then there's kind of another drop off here. Penn State, LSU at 16% each, Texas at 15%, Florida State 14%, Oklahoma 13%, and Oregon 12%. Those are the 12 teams that have a double-digit chance to make the CFP by my current numbers. Your Wisconsin Badgers sitting right there, number 13, 7.1% chance.
I wish, man. There's a lot of hype on the Badgers, and it just seems so improbable that could happen. But I do have a little nugget for us in a few minutes here to talk about when it comes to the Badgers. Maybe Fickle is the man, and maybe Mordecai is too. But I'm just going to throw out Clemson because they're at home against Florida State. I'd have them flip-flop clearly if it wasn't them, but I can expect them there. I hope there is chaos in the SEC. I'd like to see LSU in there again. I think Michigan and Ohio State are fine picks. They probably both run the table. One of them loses to each other. They beat Wisconsin, Nebraska, Minnesota. Iowa's a favorite too in the West, and they go and then one of them gets to go in just because of the one close loss, and the other one, makes it because, well, they went to the Big Ten championship and won undefeated. So I think there's a very good chance of that too. But there's literally about 7-8 teams, and it's nice to see the change in the parity here. But talking about that, I'm curious about the Heisman, and I haven't really talked about the Heisman on any podcast, but there's numbers. I know you're not in so much into sports betting, being that you are in college athletics, but you can talk like one for sure, being that you do the same stuff we do. Who do you like for Heisman, and who are your sleepers if you have any?
Yeah, so the Heisman, and it's interesting, as you mentioned, I'm mainly with team level projections, conference championship races, national championship races, things like that. But my buddy Brett Gibbons, who I do the lines.com college football show with, he wrote a whole thing about this, and we actually just did one of these previews. So I'm pulling back some of the notes that he had from that. There are some requirements basically that Heisman voters are looking for, and then there's some also preferred qualifications. And just to put them kind of together a little bit, quarterbacks it's a quarterback award now. Defensive players, regardless of how good they are, Will Anderson a couple years ago, I think, really got snubbed. Harold Perkins is one that we've been talking about this year, should maybe have an opportunity given what he can do on the defensive side of the ball, but probably even won't make it to New York, even if he has an outstanding year. So if I'm looking at quarterbacks, of course, Caleb Williams, I know he's the favorite. I know everyone's looking at him. We've only had one repeat Heisman Trophy winner ever, obviously, Archie Griffin back in the 70s, I think it was. And so it's almost impossible to repeat. And that's because not only does Caleb Williams have to be the most outstanding player in college football, but we know it's really the most outstanding offensive player. And then you break it out even further. He needs to be the best quarterback on one of the best teams, is essentially what it breaks down to. He has to be that again, but he also has to raise the bar on what he did last year. Because not only is he being compared to everybody else in the field this year, he's being compared to himself last year. And we've seen that time and time again, especially in recent years with Heisman voters and how they're looking for to vote. So for me, I think Cade Klubnik is someone who definitely deserves to be in the conversation. I've got Clemson favored in every game they're going to play this year. They're the favorite in the ACC. If they are ACC champions with 0 or 1 loss, and he's the quarterback of that team, and he lives up to that 5-star status, again, these are all big ifs. He is certainly in that conversation, and I expect to be in New York at that. Brett, my buddy who I do that other show with his preferred and requirements and all that, he says a couple sleepers might be Joe Milton. He really likes Joe Milton at Tennessee based on the numbers he has and what Tennessee has in front of them this year with opportunities for big Heisman moments. And then Jordan Travis at Florida State. So I mentioned Cade Klubnik. He's thinking Jordan Travis maybe at Florida State might have it. So to me, if you're looking for a non-quarterback, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. could certainly be an option. Blake Corum up at Michigan was in that running kind of last year till he got hurt late in the year. And if you want a really off the radar one, Brock Bowers. If Georgia's the best team in the country, and he's the best player on the offensive side of the ball, I don't believe a tight end's ever won the Heisman Trophy. Heisman Trophy voters like to do things unprecedented, like to be first to do things. He could, if he has an absolutely outstanding year. There's hype about him being a first-round pick, a top 5 pick, top 10 pick. Those are some non-quarterbacks maybe to watch, but to be honest, it's a quarterback award. It's probably going to go to the quarterback on a team that's won at least 10 games and is kind of in that mix for either a conference championship or the CFP at the end of the year. So that's kind of how I'd get to. Drake May is another one to keep an eye on as well. I think North Carolina's got a manageable schedule. And if he is able to live up to the expectation down there, which is, hey, you're going to be, a top 5 pick. If he slings that ball over the field and puts up some numbers, he'll be interesting to watch too come the end of the year.
Yeah. I mean, those are definitely, you can argue for a lot of these top ones. And Caleb Williams, is the favorite, plus 550, 5.5 to 1. Certainly no value there. Bo Nix is interesting at 16 to 1, but he did lose his offensive coordinator to Arizona State and Dillingham, so that could affect him. Sam Hartman's interesting at 16 to 1 in Notre Dame. Jaden Daniels, you can make an argument for everybody. I think the Brock Bowers one, I mean, God, you have to put a safety over the top of this guy and just pray to God that you can beat his receivers one-on-one. I just don't see why just take away Brock Bowers I'm going to probably get beat, but at least do that. That'd be my whole game plan against Georgia. Seeing Braylon Allen here is a joke, I think, for the Badgers, because Chez Mellusi is going to get plenty of play himself and in the passing game. But here's the thing that's interesting, and I know this is going to sound like a total homer pick, but I am not very high on the Badgers. But what if they do get the offense right away? What if Phil Longo, who was Drake May's offensive coordinator from North Carolina, big passing offense, air raid style. You got Tanner Mordecai, who you saw with Sonny Dykes for a year or two with SMU, was fantastic. Now Mordecai's on the Badgers on another, air raid type style offense. Maybe Tanner Mordecai at 121 could be a look, because you look at Wisconsin's schedule, and you saw it plenty of times. It's easy this year. They get Ohio State at home, and they avoid Penn State and Michigan, maybe even Michigan State. I'm not scared of Michigan State no more, but with this schedule, he's 100 to 1 right here. He's 120 to 1 in a couple books. What if Phil Longo's offense looks just like it did where he's been, North Carolina, right? I think about that.
I don't think it's a homer pick at all. I think there's reason behind it and rationale, and you just touched on a lot of the salient points. I mentioned Wisconsin's number 13 and my best chances to make the CFP at 7%. Now, that's not a big percentage, but the reasons you just talked about there, I have Wisconsin as a projected underdog in only one game this year. That is at Ohio State comes to town in week 9. So that's sandwiched between a road trip to Illinois and a road trip to Indiana. But the Buckeyes come to Wisconsin. So for me, that's the only game all year that I have Wisconsin as projected underdog. They're projected dogs by about 2 touchdowns in that game. So, I mean, that's a significant spread there. But if you're favored in every other game and you take care of business, it is the easiest schedule in the Big Ten West, among the easiest in all the Power 5. Wisconsin was a huge underachieving team last year. They won 2.5 fewer games than I expected, ranking in the bottom kind of 20 nationally in terms of my over and underachievers last year. So I have Wisconsin as a top 20 team, a top 15 defense. And if the offense can get it going, as you talked about there, I'm projecting mid 40s right now. But if they bump that up into, even like number 20, then yeah, this team could absolutely make it to Indianapolis. And once you're in that game, who knows what happens in one game with a week to prepare. I mean, you could see Wisconsin really making a run here in the first year under Fickell. I think Fickell's a great hire for them, and it might take some time. Anytime you have this much turnover, both on the coaching staff and with the roster, it's difficult to project. But the numbers, cautiously, like what they're seeing from Wisconsin on my end right now in the preseason.
All right, well, let's real quick rile up some Michigan fans because I need to ask you this. Am I looking at this right? You have Ohio State favored in every single game, including at Michigan. What is going on with this thing?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I have them favored by about 3.5 points right now, and that's Michigan hosting that game. And listen, I get it. A lot of Michigan fans just turn this thing off. I understand. You got the last 2 years, the Michigan team has beaten Ohio State. They have gone to the Big Ten championship and won the Big Ten championship and gone to the CFP. Michigan, over the course of the last 2 years, has owned the Big Ten. There is no two ways about that. They are the kings of the Big Ten right now. However, in the preseason, I'm not looking backwards. I'm using what's happened to help inform the model, but we're trying to project forward. And if we're talking about the 3 things that I'm looking at for my main inputs into preseason data, one is returning production, which, yes, Michigan does return a ton of production, not just relative to Ohio State or the Big Ten or Power 5, just nationally. They are among the top 10 in returning production this year. I think Bill Connolly put out his updated SP Plus today, and returning production numbers were in there too. And his are right there too. I mean, Michigan brings back a ton. But if we're looking at the other 2 components of the things that I'm looking at in terms of preseason K Ford ratings, it's what's your weighted 4-year K Ford rating over the last 4 years, weighted more recently, more significantly. How good has your team been? Ohio State is number 2 in that ranking for me. Michigan is number 7. So both very good, but Ohio State's ahead of Michigan. In your weighted 4-year recruiting ranking, I have Ohio State number 3. Michigan is number 14. So Ohio State's coming out ahead again there. I know how these games turned out the last 2 years, and I won't be surprised at all if Michigan beats Ohio State again this year in the Big House in Week 13. It could happen. As things stand right now, my numbers like Ohio State for a couple different reasons, and a lot can be determined about the quarterback position there at Ohio State. History has indicated that it's kind of a plug-and-play thing, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a guarantee. So we'll see how that goes because Michigan does have some fun weapons on offense. The defense should be really good. I mean, it's a really good Michigan team. They're number 4 in my power rating. Top 10 offense. It's a top 3 defense. And I have to defend it because, yeah, you're right. The numbers right now for me are a little counterintuitive. And I don't know what the Vegas line is. I think Vegas probably has Michigan favored by a couple. So I'm a little bit off from Vegas on that. But the model's giving the benefit of the doubt to Ohio State in terms of the talent that they have. And we'll see how it progresses throughout the year. But that's definitely a game to watch, of course.
Shame on you, Kelley. Jeez, man. No, I love it. You stick to your guns. That's important. You stick to it, and you could be the guy there saying, well, he was right, come the end of the season. So
no one will tell me that, though. They'll be sure to tell me on the one. Don't you worry about that. Yeah.
I love how you rile people up on Twitter with the most deserving rankings and things like that. It is just enjoyable to watch. Make sure you follow Kelley at K Ford Ratings for all that fun throughout the season. Well, let's get into a little Sun Belt action then, And let's start with the East here a little bit. We got Appalachian State and App State. They've always been a powerhouse in there, but maybe it's time to take a little bit of a step backwards. I don't know. It seems like the Sun Belt had a new champion last year with Troy, and App State just kind of keeps crushing along, but not as elite as they used to be. Heck, I remember when they were FCS and they did beat Michigan, and this was just one of the big loves that made me look, or one of the big games that made me love college football so much is just watching that. But anyways, what do you have for Appalachian State for an outlook?
Yeah, so App State for me, they're interesting. I have them as the 4th best team in their own division, but it's very, very close. I have this as the best offense in the division. Mid-50s offense nationally. The defense is concerning for me. I have App State with a sub-100 defense right now, so that could prove to be problematic for them. But it's so bunched up in the the Sun Belt East with App State, Coastal Carolina, Marshall, James Madison. It's interesting, Kip. James Madison's actually, to me, right now, very, very slightly projected as the, quote, best team in the East Division, but they are ineligible for the Sun Belt Championship this year as they're still in their transition window from FCS. So with them out of the picture, it narrows the field a little bit for this spot in the championship game. But App State, if I'm looking at their schedule here, I have App State currently as a underdog in only, give me 1 second. I have them as an underdog in, pulling it up. Sorry about that. App State's an underdog
no worries.
Just 3 games. One of them is a field goal or less. The other is between a field goal and a touchdown. And the other one's 2 to 3 scores, but that's the game at North Carolina. We know how great of a game that was last year. Currently that's 17.5 points. So that's obviously not in conference. The other two games, at James Madison, it's going to be difficult, but James Madison not being eligible. If you lose that one, everyone in your division is playing them. You don't necessarily lose ground in that. And then the other one is they currently have it as a pick'em against Wyoming, which again is not a conference game. So within the conference, I am only projecting App State as an underdog in one game, and that's against James Madison, who's ineligible for the championship. So if they win the games they're, quote, supposed to win by my numbers, they will be the East representative in the Sun Belt Championship game.
Well, conference win total is what you're kind of preaching right there, according to the sports bettors. That'd be an interesting look. I wrote down something for every team in my preseason, and obviously it's a lot shorter when it comes to the smaller conferences, but with the amount of information I have, they did not return a lot of production. And Bill Connelly's early rankings, they only ranked 131st in returning production, 36% on offense, 30% on defense. But they're a strong team. 1.24 yards per play. They really underachieved last year, losing 5 one-score games, and that's really what it was. You see a team with a 1.24 net yard per play in the positive, you think that they're going to be in the championship game, most likely in their conference, but they weren't. But I do agree with you that they are still there, and Sean Clark is still a good coach. I'm just concerned about the returning production, but you can't ignore what they've been in the past. And I always factor in past success to my power ratings when I'm doing them year by year as well. So good stuff there. It's funny you mentioned James Madison. I mean, we can probably go on a rant about how they can't play for the championship for 3 years before.
I think this might be is this the last year? I don't know. Yeah, it's at least this year though, maybe one more.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, and it sucks for them. But I just feel that this is going to motivate them to just pound through the conference like they did before. Now, James Madison, when they were FCS team, they were a highly rated team. When you looked at mixed power ratings from FCS to the FBS, they were literally in the 60s for a lot of them, especially look at Sager and stuff and a few others. So it's not like James Madison was completely under the radar, but, people were surprised that the new dog, everyone would feel it should have a target on their back, really didn't last year. But, they have to return it, or they have to fix quarterback situation. Jordan McLeod looks like he's going to be the quarterback this year. They did return a ton on defense, and my, they did have a very good defense last year. A couple weird hiccups. The Georgia Southern one was definitely a head scratcher, and App State was a good shootout there. The Georgia State game, I think that was a garbage touchdown at the end there. But I'm very bummed out that they can't play. But Kirk Cignetti is an amazing coach, and I'm not going to be looking to fade them guys coming in, and their Vegas win total is 8. So they're looking to be a pretty good team. 1.43 net yards per play.
Yeah, you said their Vegas win total is 8. I've got a 55% chance to win 8+ games, a 30% chance to win 9+. So 30% chance to cash that over with another 25% chance to push it is what I would say. So yeah, they're going to be a really good team.
All right, good stuff. Let's move on to the Chanticleers. We got Coastal Carolina here. Big changes in this program, Kelley. What happened?
Yeah, so of course, got Grayson McCall, coming back, but Chadwell's moved on, so we'll see what happens there. Coastal Carolina is interesting, though. There's only 2 games all year that my numbers have the chance as an underdog. Of course, week 1, they go to UCLA, about a 2-touchdown dog in that one. Not a conference game. The other one, that game at App State, it's in week 7. Both teams are coming off a bye. The East very well could be on the line in that game. The winner of that game at least could have the inside track in the East. So for Coastal Carolina, I like this offense. Even with the changes, they're a top 60 offense for me. The defense is sub 100. So I've got some questions there, similar to some other teams we've talked about too. But I think Coastal Carolina is going to be a good team this year. I know they're undergoing changes. There's a lot happening, but I still have a 28% chance to match or exceed last year's regular season win total of 9, and just a 10% chance to go 10+. So while they're favored in every single game but 2, they have 4 games in which they are favored by a field goal or less, and another game that's between a field goal and touchdown. So a lot of close games. If they can go have a winning record in these 1-score games, they're going to have a good year. If they don't, they'll probably be disappointed at the end of the year. But it's all right there in front of Coastal Carolina, and I think they have the tools that they need to go get it done. That game at App State in week 7 is absolutely going to be massive.
Oh, it will be massive. And like you just said, I'm never worried about the offense. It's funny how Grayson McCall toyed with the transfer portal in like December, January, scared him a little bit, but Tim Beck got him back, which is very important for his legacy, obviously going forward. But it's a defense, really. 110th in EPA was really the problem, but that's always been the problem with them. And they play a team with a shut you down defense. They get beat bad. They just like Troy. They scored 26-45 against Troy. James Madison 7-47. Now with the clock running after first downs, that could affect them a little bit more with the rule change here. So I am definitely concerned. Two cases really I built against App State. They didn't return a lot of guys, and Coastal Carolina sitting here with a poor defense. We'll see if Grayson McCall really puts that big effort into. He's got to have in the back of his mind that he could be possibly a late round draft pick or something. So I will say that they were one of the funnest teams to watch under Chadwell. And it was really shocking to me seeing Liberty with all their deep pockets, really pull him away, that was shocking. But when they got beat bad. And that's why, they didn't have a great net yards per play. Let's move on to a interesting team. And I'm going to say interesting because I think I'm going to take a shot with them at 12-1 to win the East. I'm certainly not going to bet them to win the Sun Belt because I believe that South Alabama and Troy, which we'll get to, is much better than these teams. But I'm going to look at the Georgia State Panthers here. And Georgia State is interesting because they returned their quarterback in Darren Granger. And he actually did a decent job last year. Sean Elliott I think he's kind of flying a little bit under the radar. He's a decent coach here. And they bring back 4 of their top 5 linebackers, or their top tacklers. I like their schedule this year because they at least get James Madison and App State at home. Now, they probably lose. They might steal one of those games. And they also avoid South Alabama on the other side. They get Troy, but they get Troy at home. Maybe get lucky a little bit, get 1 or 2 of those wins. They're looking at it as full conference. You don't have just to beat the East when it comes to representing the East. I don't mind a 12-1 shot at them winning just based on their schedule, the fact that they get the tough guys at home, and the fact that they have a decent amount of returning production, at least on offense. I'm going to see what your thoughts are on Georgia State.
Yeah, Georgia, that's interesting. I think I failed to mention I have Coastal Carolina as my favorite in the East, even though they're not the best team because they scheduled 31% chance to make the conference championship game. The reason I say that is I have just a 3% chance for Georgia State to make the conference championship game. So I'm a little bit more down on them, I think, than you are. I do like this offense. It's a top 70 offense for me. The defense is about number 115-ish. So big concerns there on the defensive side. If I look at their schedule, I have them as a favorite in only 4 games. 3 of those are non-conference games to start the year: Rhode Island, UConn, and Charlotte. So I see them as being underdogs in a lot of games. 6 of those games are a field goal or less, though. So a lot of close games, like you said, and if they can get some of those, then maybe they can get there. I'm not quite there on them. I actually think Georgia State might take a slight step back from last year's team. Last year's team finished the year power rated number 86. I have them coming in this year at 101. But I've been wrong before. I'll be wrong again, and they could surprise me. That's for sure. It's a tough. I get what you're saying about some of these games at home. Troy, Marshall, another one that's been James Madison, App State. All these games at home. Those are good games to have at home because those are tough opponents. But I'm still projecting them as small dogs in all those, underdogs from week 4 all the way down through week 12 with a bye week in week 6. So it'll be tough, but if they can win the close games, then they could definitely be an overachiever this year.
It's funny. I definitely have them power rated under App State. I have them power rated under Coastal Carolina and quite a few others, but they're just an interesting look because with all the change in college football, one of these teams is going to sneak up on us like Tulane did to everybody last year. And it's always fun, Kelley, to discuss that, but it's great to have disagreement too, because that's what we're here for. We want to give the listeners every side of every situation. Now, I don't really want to get into Georgia Southern so much with Clay Helton. Now, when he beat Nebraska, people were thinking, well, hey, here they come going. But then, they lose at UAB and they have some pretty nasty losses here. But I think I'd rather talk a little bit about Marshall here. And Marshall was interesting. How do you go to Notre Dame and win and then go to Bowling Green and lose last year, Kelley? That's college football, isn't it?
That is college football 101. That's why we love this sport. Yes, Marshall, a team. I mean, you could ask a question about Notre Dame. How do you lose to teams like Marshall and Stanford and then perform well in the other games? It's crazy. So yes, college football is wild. We absolutely love it. Unlike these other Sun Belt teams we've been talking about, where I kind of like the offense and have questions about the defense, I think this Marshall defense is going to be really good. I have them as top 30. The offense is the problem for me, and they're hovering around number 100. But Marshall is this third team in the East race. I've got Coastal Carolina, Marshall, and App State all with a 27 to 31% chance to win the East. So, I mean, it's kind of a round robin here between these, and how's it going to go? What I don't like about Marshall, what really sticks out is they've got a brutal stretch. Weeks 8, 9, and 10. They get James Madison at home. We know James Madison isn't eligible, but they're a really good team. Then they have to go on the road to Coastal Carolina and on the road at App State. All the contenders, all the best teams in their division, they get back to back to back with 2 of them on the road. So while I have Marshall as maybe a slightly better team than either Coastal or App State, the fact they have to go on the road in both those games tips the scale the other way. I've got Marshall as an underdog in 4 games, 3 of them by a field goal or less. The only one that they're an underdog of more than a field goal is week 6. It's a non-conference game. They go to NC State, which could be an interesting one for the Thundering Herd. But yes, I like this Marshall team. I really like this defense. That's why I wanted to talk about the Sun Belt with you, because the Sun Belt's so exciting. There's so many close teams. It's going to be decided by close games. Which teams are going to end the year with a 4-1, 5-1, 6-0 record in 1-score games? That's who's going to rise to the top of the Sun Belt, and the margins are going to be very, very thin in this conference.
No, it's a great conference pick. I'm glad you did, and it's just so interesting. Don't forget at South Alabama after then they get Georgia Southern at home, and then at South Alabama. I mean, that's tough. That's a tough stretch, and I looked at that stretch too, and I was thinking to myself, well, they go to Georgia State too. I mean, pick your poison really in there. Let's move on to the tougher side, and with apologies to Old Dominion and Georgia Southern, but the tougher side is more interesting to me because you got Troy. And you might as well start here at the top that won it last year. They're kind of like the Tulanes as well. They kind of snuck out of nowhere and just showed hit you in the mouth defense. And man, those points that Coastal scored against them in the championship game, that was garbage points. They were just destroying this team by halftime. They put their second string in. I mean, this wasn't even a close game. What was one of the best defenses that I've seen last year, and it was just so fun to watch the Trojans last year. But here they are, and they return massive production. 2 wide receivers. They return Gunnar Watson, their quarterback. They return their running backs. I could see them winning again. My only hiccup here is the South Alabama game. I think that's a little bit dangerous, but they didn't get James Madison last year. They get James Madison at home after the Kansas State game. That's going to be one I'm going to circle to find out what happens after Kansas State. If they somehow sneak an upset, I might be looking at James Madison, but this is just a very interesting schedule and an interesting team this year, Kelley.
Yeah, Troy's going to – I really like Troy too. They're my favorite in the West, 42% chance to make the conference championship game. They are the best team in the West by my numbers. This defense is the top 40 unit. Offense, hovering around the mid-80s, which you can get away with. I think that should be serviceable. Only one game all year that I make Troy a projected underdog, and that's that week 2 game you talk about at Kansas State. We saw Tulane go up to Manhattan and get a win in week 2, I believe it was last year. We'll see if Troy's able to do it this year. I think Kansas State should be better prepared for that kind of upset bid this time, but Troy's going to present a problem, that's for sure. Every other game, I've got Troy as a projected favorite. Now, only one of them by a field goal or less, but there are 6 between a field goal and a touchdown. So there's 7 games in which I'm projecting a 1-score favor by the line for Troy this year. I'm looking at it, and yeah, they catch James Madison out of the East, but they don't catch Coastal Carolina. They don't catch App State, and they don't catch Marshall. So those other kind of top teams out of the East, they're not catching. And in the West, South Alabama and Louisiana are the main threats for me. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about the other West teams. And they get both of those teams at home later in the year, week 10 against South Alabama, week 12 against Louisiana there. So I think the schedule sets up pretty nicely for Troy. I think this is the best team in this division. I think they have the best defense in the division. And I have them favored in every game except for one. This was one of my biggest overachievers last year, winning 10 regular season games. That was 3.5 more than I projected. That made Troy the 6th biggest overachiever in FBS last year by my numbers. I very much think that Troy is going to be a big-time player in the Sun Belt this year, and especially in that West Division.
Amen. And I'm with you. I have Troy as the best team in the Sun Belt by a quarter point, though. And they do get South Alabama at home because I have South Alabama really is my second best team here. So, that's the difference. But South Alabama, Miles will move right to them. I have them 4.25 points greater than the average team, and Troy 4.5. But South Alabama ranks 13th in returning production, according to Bill Conley, 71% on offense, 82% on defense. They were 0.61 net yards per play last year. Their win total is literally what Troy's is at 8. I mean, you can look at them, and they have some tricky games. Just like any Sun Belt team, they'll have a big-time game at Texas A&M. They have one this year. Ole Miss later in the season, so that's why you're seeing the win totals of 8, for both of these teams. But, man, they almost beat UCLA last year, and that was fun. Just really surprised them going in, and holy cow, they caught me by surprise. And the fact that they return so much production on offense is amazing. And I think that, Carter Bradley might even take a step forward. He returns all his receivers. They return 4 of 5 offensive lines. The only game that in the conference, no, they have 2. I have 2 that they're going to be dogs at James Madison and at Troy.
Yep.
But that's the big difference for me. I'm guessing your numbers probably match up a little bit.
Yep, that's exactly right. Those are the only 2 conference games that I'm projecting the Jags to be underdogs in. Non-conference, they go to Tulane in week 1. That could be a tricky game for Tulane. They better watch out for that one. And then at Oklahoma State in week 3. If South Alabama could figure out a way to get one of those 2, that would be a phenomenal way for them to start the year and dive into Sun Belt play a couple weeks later with that road trip to James Madison. They start right off the bat, conference play at James Madison before going to ULM the week after that. So it's the game at Troy. To me, that's the Sun Belt West game of the year. It's in week 10, South Alabama at Troy, 2 favorites. They're going to be right there. I think Louisiana might sniff around and see what they can do. But to me, it's South Alabama and Troy. And if South Alabama is able to win that game, they certainly have a leg up and will have a chance to do it here because they, like Troy, they avoid Coastal Carolina. They avoid Marshall. They don't avoid Marshall. They get Marshall at home, but they avoid App State as well. So that Marshall game at home, that's going to be a difficult one too in week 12.
Yeah, absolutely it will. And it's too bad that South Alabama is with Troy because if they're on the other side, I would definitely look at them for a championship. Let's move on to Louisiana. We have time for one more. And I have them probably lower than you. I would have them about an 8-point difference between Troy and more like 7.5 actually. And I'm just not buying them so much, since they lost their coach, obviously, to Florida here. Now it's the second year. And they're even at net yards per play, returning production ranks 66. They're 6.5 net yards per play. Mike DeSormo did have a rebuilding year last year, but this is just another team that I thought was kind of decimated from transfers again. And it's just disappointing for them to be in that situation. And they're going to have a rough schedule. I'm not buying them so much, but maybe you have something different.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there's unknown uncertainty. And of course, Billy Napier's gone and has been gone for a year now. To me, the offense is still projecting as one of the top 2 in the division. The defense is kind of more middle of the pack. But I'm looking at there is a drop in quality between Troy and South Alabama to Louisiana. The reason Louisiana's kind of still in that mix, 21% chance to make the conference championship game, is because the schedule for me. I have this as the easiest schedule in the division overall. Now that incorporates non-conference as well, which of course is not going to go into the conference standings, obviously. But when we're looking at Louisiana, they miss the heavy hitters out of the East. They don't get Coastal Carolina. They don't get Marshall. They don't get App State. They don't get James Madison. They don't get any of those teams out of the East. What stinks for Louisiana is they get both Troy and South Alabama on the road. So you're going to have to split those. You can't lose both those games, even if you run the table elsewhere and expect that 6-2 is going to be good enough when you've lost the head-to-head to both those teams. So you're going to have to split those. That's a big ask. I've got a 5.5-point dog against South Alabama and a 7-point dog against Troy. So you're going to have to pull at least one upset there and then not get upset in your other games. So I think they're there with an outside chance looking in. They're ready to pounce if South Alabama or Troy were to stumble, but they're certainly, from a quality standpoint, a step below those two in the West.
I agree. It's Troy's and South Alabama's to lose for sure in the West. And I just see them as much better. So didn't need to go too much farther into Louisiana, but there's a few other teams we didn't touch on: Southern Miss, Texas State, Old Dominion. Is there anything you want to say about any of those teams?
No, if I'm looking at it from a preview standpoint, chances to reach the Sun Belt Championship game, none of those teams are really registering with a legitimate chance. Really, for me, in the East, Coastal, Marshall, App State, and in the West, Troy, South Alabama, with Louisiana trying to have a look into.
No, that's absolutely fine. Oh, man, great stuff. Thank you so much for sharing all this amazing information at K Ford Ratings. Where could our listeners and viewers get your great info and media?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. This is always fun. I enjoy coming on with you anytime. You can find me on Twitter at K Ford Ratings. I have the website, kfordratings.com. You can now find me as well on a couple of different podcast outlets at thelines.com, doing some college football writing over there, as well as the college football show on podcast. And then, of course, the podcast that I have with my buddy Zach, We Hate Your Team. So I'm out there. I'm accessible. I like to interact. I like to talk to people, debate college football things. And it's only going to get more fun once the games start rolling here in only a couple of days.
That's right. Make sure you guys check out K Ford Ratings. Kelley, it's been a pleasure. Let's have some fun on Twitter this year, my man.
Let's do it. I cannot wait. Always appreciate it. Can't wait for the season.